Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. And it's my great pleasure to welcome today's program Evan Pusey, who is CMO at Keywell. And today we're going to talk about the network effect in TMS. Now, this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. It's an area that I think a lot of companies still don't quite understand what that term means, what the network effect means, and what the importance of connectivity is to a TMS deployment, not only the deployment and the initial kind of implementation, but the ongoing aspect of it as well. And, we've had Evan here on the program a few times. We've talked about supply chain execution convergence. We've talked about other topics. So certainly it's great to have him back in the program to talk about the network effect. And it's an area that certainly Keywell has been involved with, particularly more recently with their acquisition of the Sterling, product. So certainly welcoming, look forward to have a great conversation around this area. I just want to remind those of you that are joining us live today that, part of our goal here at Talking Logistics is to make this conversational. So if you do have a question for Evan as we're kind of having our conversation here, you can do so via the submit a question button, and I will keep an eye on that, and if it's a good and appropriate question and we have time, I'll try to weave it into the conversation. Finally, if you are joining us as a visitor, you will have to sign in first to be able to ask a question. So with that, Evan, welcome back to the program.
Hi, thanks, Adrian, and great to be back again. Hopefully, we can extend our conversation on TMS a little bit further and probably a little bit deeper below the sort of fancy functional front end and into the core of what really gets TMS up and running for people and actually delivering for them.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think with this topic, one of the things that I've noticed is a lot of times when companies are looking for TMS and they're evaluating TMS solutions, they immediately kind of put together a feature and function list, right? These are the software capabilities that we're looking to that we're looking to implement, and that's certainly important. I don't want to minimize the importance of that, of understanding the software functionality, but a lot of times they kind of overlooked kind of the connectivity aspect of it, which is really another, very critical aspect of it. But I think a lot of companies, don't fully understand it or appreciate it or know what that is. And certainly that's part of our goal here today, is try to, educate the market on that. So why don't we start again with that very basic question, what is network connectivity and why is it so critical to the success of a TMS deployment?
Yeah, thanks, Adrian. It's a great opener. I guess, to put this into context for most businesses, many people looking for a TMS are going from manually processing their shipments and interacting with carriers. So I'm picking up the phone, I'm sending a fax, I'm sending an email. Apologies for mentioning fax for all those people who are younger than I am. You probably don't even see one of those in an office these days. The network connectivity piece versus the functionality piece is actually replacing, that process of manually picking up a phone and calling a carrier and saying, can I get a truck on this date to take these goods from point A to point B? Instead, what we want to do is, put that information into the system, allow the system to plan that shipment, and what it needs to be able to do when we've made the plan is then communicate that information, hopefully in electronic automated format, to remove that manual labor. And, what people need to think about, when they start to think about TMS is not just, as you mentioned, the functionality that I need to do the planning piece. It's also the connectivity I will need at the back of that. And, there's lots of connectivity in business today. Most people today do some type of EDI, B2B sort of business integration. Whether it be, orders, ASNs, invoices with their customers and their suppliers. So this is not dissimilar. I've got a network out there of carriers that I've been communicating to probably manually in the past. Now I want to actually start to connect them electronically, and that will speed up the process and automate the process, which again is a big payback to the users, because what the users will be able to do is get that time back to invest in better planning and optimization and those sort of things.
No, absolutely. I kind of make the analogy to folks and say, well, it's like, buying a laptop or buying like a cell phone, right? And you're looking at all the software capabilities, all the, neat features and functions. But it's like having, that piece of hardware and that software on that laptop or phone. But then when you go to try to get on Facebook or LinkedIn or go try to send that email, or kind of use the power of that smartphone, if you're not connected to the internet, if you're not connected to a cellular network, you're kind of limited to what you can do with that, piece of technology. And in similar ways to, a TMS, ultimately, transportation management is inherently network centric. You got to exchange information and data and documents with carriers and, suppliers and other trading partners. And unless you've got that network in place, you're going to be limited by what you can do with that TMS.
Correct, and I think the analogy you make there is a very valid one in that I guess the extension to that here is that most customers today out there probably aren't just using one carrier for their transportation; they're using multiple. So they need connectivity to multiple players, and that's really where the network capability comes in. Now, if we sort of think back to where people start to go out to market, I think there's a lot of time and effort thought about, quite often, into a blue sky approach about what's all the additional functionality we could get. To your point, I think I also look at it as a bit of an iceberg approach. You've got the third of the iceberg above the water that we can all see, and that's like the front end, the user interface where people actually get interactive with the software, and then below the waterline, you've actually got this carrier network. And in actual fact, the carrier network can be a bigger piece of this in a number of different factors. Now, in getting to a carrier network, you've got a couple of choices. You can choose to build your own, okay, and that has good and bad points about it, or you could choose to leverage an existing carrier network. Building your own, you have to go down the path of do we know the right people at the carriers to talk to? And that's probably not the person I normally call up about my shipment, right? Because I'll probably need to speak to somebody in their IT department. I'll need to understand how they connect and what their technical capabilities are. They may already have pre-formatted message types that they want to send and receive. And usually that depends on the size of the carrier. So the bigger guys, where you're a smaller customer, may be prescriptive to you. And the smaller carriers where you're a big customer, you may be able to be more prescriptive with them. But there's a whole requirement for the right people on both sides of the equation to sit down and talk about how you're going to get connected and actually map out that process flow. Now, if you pick up on an existing carrier network, I guess some of the benefits you get are that potentially the majority of carriers, if not all of them that you want to connect to, are already exchanging information with other shippers, manufacturers, distributors, or retailers. So their IT department is already aware of having to get connected. There is already that connectivity established, and this is essentially just pushing more messages down that same pipe. So there's a huge speed to market available as well. In picking up a network versus building your own. And you can leverage the hard work already done by other people to a significant benefit during your TMS implementation.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think one of the when I talk to companies that have implemented a TMS, I mean, the two things that ultimately bog down an implementation historically, particularly with kind of an on-premise, TMS, has been, data cleansing, right? Getting all the data in the right format and everything else to kind of get the initial implementation to go live and be relevant to their operations. And secondly, is that connectivity and kind of establishing those connections with the carriers and the other trading partners that are involved in the execution process. And for some of the reasons that you talked about, right? It's getting to the right person at the carriers, understanding the EDI or the messaging format and doing the mapping. And the reality is, that there's actually a lot of IT and resources involved in doing all of this, right? There's hardware investments that are required. There's software investments that are required beyond just the TMS, right? There's EDI mapping, translation software, so on and so forth. So there's, I don't know if you've had a chance to kind of, maybe provide some more detail on that. But, some of the factors that companies really need to think through in terms of, okay, if we're going to do this ourselves, right, what is it that we're going to need to have in place from a technology standpoint, from a resource standpoint to do it right?
Yeah, so if we drill into, the first of the two options, right, the build your own, first thing we're going to look at is, do you have people who have spare time, right, during the project, all right, to sit down, map out each of the carriers, talk to each of the carriers and understand their requirements? Then they're probably going to need some IT support internally, who are then going to need a tool set, okay, to build out, the message mappings, etc. They're going to need then a connectivity path. So am I using a traditional WAN provider, or do I need a third-party, EDI provider, who's then going to take those mapped messages and transmit them to the carrier, and also bring back messages, because this is a two-way, communication flow. So not only are we sending data out, we're hopefully getting data back, confirmation, status updates, 210s, 214s, the traditional TMS sort of message types. So, there's a lot of behind the scenes work to do, okay? There's a lot of IT work to do. And then, you've got testing. So as we build each of those connections, we then have to test them out. And I think, when you take all of those pieces into account, it's one of the, hidden parts of a TMS implementation that's not often raised by, your TMS implementation partner, and probably not one that, really jumps off the page when you're doing your own planning. And, it can catch people out. And if you're a business, you've, built the business case, gone to the board, got approval, made the spend, based on a certain return on investment case. And then we get, 1 month in and we've mapped out our project plan. And now we're looking at a 6 to 9 month to 12 month beyond window just to get the carrier connectivity there. You don't want to be the guy that's going to have to go back to the board meeting next month and say, well, we thought this was going to be, a 3 to 6 month ROI, but, because of this carrier connectivity piece, we're going to end up being, 12 plus months or more. So, it is a fairly important piece, and it is a success criteria, because unless you get the carriers connected, you can do all the, optimized planning you want in a new piece of software, but you're still going to have to go back to that manual process to then actually make the communication happen that makes, that makes the carrier aware that they've got to come and pick up some goods and give you the updates on where your goods are. So, it's not simple. It's not something that's, owned within only the sort of transportation team. They tend not to have their own IT resources and capabilities. It affects other parts of the business. And, I think a number of these projects, and you see this more in the SaaS TMS world, where we're going from sort of CapEx spend to operational expenditure, we're trying to limit the impact on the rest of the business while actually improving our systems capabilities and therefore getting greater benefit for the business. So you don't really want to be caught out by this. And building your own carrier network, I would say for a lot of the small to medium players, if not some of the very large players, can be something that, you don't really want to take on that workload yourself, particularly if you can benefit from a pre-existing carrier network that can significantly reduce that amount of effort.
No, I agree. I mean, I've been a proponent of network-based solutions for a long time for exactly those reasons that you talked about. I mean, in my opinion, I think that B2B connectivity, whether it's with carriers or other trading partners, ought to be viewed almost as a utility, right? Companies aren't building their own internet networks. They aren't building their own power plants, so on and so forth. And, the concept of and the value proposition that a software as a service, a cloud-based network brings to the table, I think is powerful from that standpoint. It's the difference between making all that investment in additional hardware, additional software, and the resources and time to kind of bring up a carrier network and a trading partner network, and not only bring it up, but you have to maintain it, because as we know, right, those networks are changing all the time. There's a difference between managing hundreds, if not thousands, of those connections which are changing all the time, versus making a single connection to a network provider that, well, the onus is on them, if you will, and the expertise should be of theirs to manage those connections and the data quality and everything else, right? So let's dive a little bit deeper now on kind of that approach, right? So, I think that the bottom line here, what we've talked so far, is that if you are going to embark on doing this on your own, you really need to understand the full scope of what you're getting yourself into, if you will, in terms of understanding the additional costs and IT requirements and work effort involved, not only up front but on an ongoing basis. So now let's look at this kind of the SaaS approach. I mean, how does the built-in network approach, how does that work from a deployment process, and kind of what are the unique benefits of value propositions that provides?
Cool. So, let's talk about option 2, right? The pre-existing network that I can piggyback on or leverage from the hard work already done. So most of those networks, including our own, have been built up over time because by implementing, multiple customers, hundreds of customers, what you tend to find is with each customer, you'll get a match, right? So, you use carrier ABC, and you've been on the software for a year. I come on and I use ABC and DEF. Well, ABC already exists. So half my carrier onboarding is done. So now, I load up DEF. The next person comes along and looks for, GHI. So they're going to get the benefit of both of us and add another carrier. At a point in time, you sort of tip the scale, and you get the benefit of being able to come on and, I would almost suggest, as people go through that RFP process and start checking the functionality, what they should be doing is saying, hey, let me do a carrier match with your network. I've got these carriers today. Tell me how many of those you're already connected to. And one of the big benefits there is I can immediately see, the ramp up speed in implementing the software, and I can immediately see the reduction in effort I'm going to have to do if I want to build out a network, either with my TMS partner or my own standalone network. Now, if you think about it from the carrier's perspective, right, the carrier's preference is not to have to link, you don't want to link to 100 individual carriers because there's a lot of work to that. The carrier doesn't want to link to 100 individual networks. So there's a break-in point in time where, the carrier starts to push back and say, hang on, I'm linked to 1 or 2 networks now. How many more of these do I need to do it? Yes, I'm happy to get connected, but you need to get hooked up through my, the network I'm connected to. And, that's how a lot of these networks build up. It's not just the TMS network. I mean, we could go back 20 years to, how the sort of value-added networks built up. They had all these little communities. The real value in value-added networks came when those communities got together, because I could now put my data into one place and get it to the majority of people, right, that were already connected. So, thinking about those, option 2, a pre-existing network, okay? And to your point, a lot of those pre-existing carrier networks today exist with the TMS SaaS systems because, with a SaaS implementation of a TMS, every time I add a carrier for one customer, it actually becomes available for any other customer. Now, we don't want to over-egg the pudding on that one, as they say, where I'm based here in the UK. There's still a little bit of work to do because, the carrier needs to know that you now want to communicate electronically. And we, generally speaking, on our network, and we have a pretty broad network, it's, within, very close to about 16,000 carriers now connected to the QL, transportation network. We have some very IT savvy carriers that have good systems at their end, that can fully automate that process. So, it comes down to a phone call to warn the carrier that says, hey, Adrian's Transport is now going to use our TMS network. And, as of this date, you'll start receiving, their messages electronically. So where Adrian used to ring you up on a daily basis and book his requirements, he's now just going to send you those messages. For I would say a lot of the small to medium carriers that aren't, got big, technical teams and don't have, what I would call enterprise level systems, in their businesses themselves, then, we do a little bit of additional work with them because a lot of those use a manual portal type process off our system. So they actually log into our system to see the orders that you're sending to them and interact with them and send information back. So there is a mix, right? I'd like to say that every new customer we bring on these days doesn't add another carrier. That's not always true. There's still the odd one out there. I think someone mentioned to me in a conversation last week that there's like 1 million, transportation carriers out there in the world. So, we've got 16,000, and that's probably the biggest, in the marketplace today, certainly in North America. But it's a long ways from having every single carrier connected. And there's new businesses start up, every month, and there's businesses close down. So it's a continuous process. We expect to, be adding new, and managing, what we'd call dormant, carriers. So a carrier that was added for a given shipper that today is not active may become active again in the future when a shipper picks that carrier up. The real benefit, as I say, is, speed to market, because that connectivity is already built. Once you start sending us your information, we can get you electronically connected very, very fast. We can take away all the, the conversation, the planning, the building, and deployment and testing, because it's already been done. The other benefit is, or other benefits that we can start to think about from that connected carrier network is, things like, I've now got visibility on, goods moving. So, you can get genericized visibility of, which carriers are servicing which lanes. So it can help me when I'm looking to add a new lane through the system, see, okay, well, there's 5 different carriers that are currently moving trucks between point A and point B, on the QL network for all the QL customers. Maybe that gives me a short list of carriers that I can speak to, when I want to start moving goods up and down that lane. We can do things like we have shipper customers today that not only use generic fleet, they have their own private fleet. We can create them as both a shipper, sending their requests out to carriers, but we can put their private fleet on as a standalone carrier, and they can actually now almost publish their free capacity as a carrier on our network, and potentially pick up business that's going to pay for, the capacity they have available in their own private fleet. So you start to build out a two-way network capability, and just open up a broad array of options, for both the carriers and the shippers that are interacting across that network. I'm sure you've come across customers that are doing that, and maybe customers that are even trying to do shipper-to-shipper collaboration, which, 15 years ago is, some of the conversations that kicked off some of today's TMS application.
Yeah, no, you brought up some great, examples there. I think the bottom line is, number one is that the value and the benefits go beyond just, the onboarding process in terms of simplifying and expediting the onboarding piece, but that there's ongoing value and ongoing benefits that can be derived from that, because you've got all these partners and all this data going through a single network. You can do things like, carrier discovery, right? So if you're, like you mentioned, if you're looking to find new carriers in particular lanes, you can look at the, existing network providers, carriers that are on the network, to find opportunities there as part of a procurement engagement, as an example. So I think that's a great example there. I think the other, bottom line is that, that there's benefits also for the carriers and the other trading partners, not just the shippers. The ability for them via single connection to interact with multiple shippers, simplifies their life as well in terms of managing all the connections that they have to make, right? So I think it's a win-win, for both the shippers and the carriers, from that standpoint. I think one of the areas I'll be curious to see how you see kind of the value of these networks evolving over time. Certainly one of the areas that I think we're still in the early stages of is what I've been calling network-based analytics, right? So to be able to take this data that's flowing through the network and be able to do, benchmarking off of that, right? And be able to provide, companies with, insights that they really couldn't get on their own if they were building their own network. Being able to leverage this data from external parties to create this external benchmark, if you will. So I see that as an area that we see some early success stories in that area, but I think there's more that can be done. So just kind of curious in terms of what you think about that, and maybe perhaps how you see this evolving, other benefits evolving over time.
Yeah, that's I guess we'd bring that in as the sort of TMS segment under the umbrella of big data, right? If you think about our network in particular, we're shifting about 245 million shipments in the last 12 months through that network. What it gives us is some information that we can use to give insight into trends in the industry, shifts in the industry, and what we're starting to look to do is try and take that wealth of data, obviously normalize it, because a lot of that information is specific to shippers and carriers. We would never put that information in a situation where that kind of information would be shared beyond what has been agreed with the individual owners of that detailed data. But if you start to think about do you want to do some benchmarking? So I move goods from point A to point B. I know what it costs me today, but can I get a feel for whether I'm overpaying or underpaying? So we can start to let's have a look at all the transactions that we processed through that lane. As I say, let's normalize that data and come up with what's the average for shipments up and down that path. And then we can start to help our customers say, well, hang on, I'm paying $250 a shipment, from A to B, but your average says most people are paying $180 per shipment. What am I doing differently? Am I using a carrier that provides additional services, that a faster service? Let me drill into that and try and understand how maybe I'm either getting a better deal. Why am I getting a better deal, or why am I not getting a better deal? And if I want to open up a new trade lane, some of the things we're starting to discuss with our customers is around forecasting their transportation needs, and the business might make a change. So we had a customer recently that was saying the business now wants to open a new marketplace in X. That's great. They're going to sell all these units. Well, we need to start to think about how we're going to transport and deliver goods in those and model out the cost base for that. So again, you've got the network visibility there. What carriers are currently, servicing that lane? What's the average cost of a shipment in that lane? And we can then start to make a business model that's got a lot more detail and analysis behind it, rather than sort of a bit of a pen and paper type exercise, having rung a couple of carriers to get an idea. We can use that wealth of information to actually support that analysis and business thought process into then the flow of making that come to life and happen, making it happen through the systems itself.
No, absolutely. I think there's a lot of opportunities, as you said, under the umbrella of business intelligence and analytics that can be put forward because of the network approach and the data flowing through a network. Evan, we're kind of running short on time here. So just as a way to kind of wrap up, I mean, when it comes to, network connectivity and particularly those, shippers, companies that are in the process of evaluating, TMS options, I mean, what questions, should they ask to determine whether, what is the best path forward for them?
So I think the few things that, again, we don't often see on an RFP that we'd like, we challenge, those people, those prospective customers to think about, would be one. I would suggest the first thing you need to do is understand whether you actually have the internal capability to build your own network, right? If you don't have it, you're not as a company just going to want to build out a whole IT, systems infrastructure, to make that possible. Two, depending on how many carriers you've got, if you've got one or two, then, it may not be a big issue. But if you've got more than that, and most people do, think about the timeline that essentially you're going to waste, because what you're going to do in taking the time to build out that carrier network, in essence, duplicating effort that's already been done for other, by other people, you're delaying your time to return on investment, right? So we all know TMS gives savings to businesses. So why delay it? Why not take the option to use that carrier network to speed my capability to return on investment to the business? And, a lot of these IT projects today are, and quite correctly, and I think we talked about this on one of our earlier calls, is, let's do phase one, and then let's do phase two, and let's do phase three. And, a lot of the business approval for these programs is based on the success to the first phase. So why wouldn't we want to make the first phase very successful in a very short space of time, so that we can then move on to the next phases? And I think, that network piece has caught people out in the past, and we don't want that to continue to do that. So I think you look at that, and then I think the third piece is, the bigger and broader the network, the more players you've got interacting on that network, the more options and opportunity you've got going forward. And that doesn't mean that on day one you start to, look at, do I replace every carrier I use today? Again, we take this in a phased approach. Let's make sure we get, the relationships that we've got today up and running in an electronic format through our TMS. There's a benefit there. Let's get that return, and then let's start to come back. And as I say, start to do those benchmarking type reviews that says, hang on, I might be overpaying on this lane. Let me think about that. Let me talk to some other players. Let's look at who else is there. Let's look at potentially the collaboration. My private fleet goes from A to B full. It comes back from B to A empty. Adrian's goes from B to A full, comes from A to B empty. Maybe we should be talking, right? Because maybe we can half the effort and half the number of trips we do just by sharing. I put that one out there, but, I think in the early collaboration days, lots of people got together and thought this would be a great thing to do. But there's a lot of detail that needs to play out. Your goods and my goods might need different transportation capabilities, different driver capabilities, etc. So I don't want to make it sound, that this is really easy. Like any collaboration, it takes time to get to know the other party and understand what they're doing. But I do see that as as an upcoming benefit. And it is one of those ones that as we get the basics running, we get the return on investment. Most importantly, the people today that are spending 100% of their time just getting shipments, through the gate, and on their way to a customer or on the way to another distribution center or wherever it may be, are gaining time back by automating a lot of that effort through their TMS. And what they can start to do is use that time to invest in, those improvements, those enhancements, that analysis that will allow us to eke out those incremental benefits as we go forward. So I think networks are definitely important. I think more and more of the mid to low tier shippers, that don't have the time and AT capability can really start to take that effort off the table. And, the challenge I would throw out there as you go through your review process is, do that carrier matching. See how much of those carriers you use today will be, a very short path to getting them up and running on a network. I think what we'll see is the industry starting to collaborate more. And by industry, I mean the solution providers starting to collaborate more on getting their own the networks connected, so that we can actually offer, a broader and better solution for all of our customers.
No, great advice and food for thought there, Evan. And, like I always say at the end of all our programs, we always just manage to scratch the surface, but I think we really got the conversation started. I think hopefully, we put forward, some key points and arguments, if you will, as to why, the pros and cons, if you will, of building your own network versus going with a built-in network that is common with a SaaS TMS, and kind of the considerations that companies need to make a more informed decision when they're evaluating their TMS options. So, again, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today.
Adrian, thanks very much. Again, a pleasure, and hopefully, anyone that's listening in today or listens in the future will be able to take something away from our conversation today that helps them, either improve and enhance their existing TMS situation, or they can utilize it as they go into, a program of enhancement of their TMS. So, thanks very much for your time again today.
Great. Now, we didn't get any questions live today, but if you are watching this episode on demand and you have a question for Evan, you can do so by posting a comment there. You can find this episode on talkinglogistics.com. Just search for it, post a comment there, and I'm sure Evan will be more than happy to respond via that medium. So again, thank you all for joining us today, and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.
Thanks, Adrian.